Oh, hello, you. Chris Stone here, the continuous improvement coach, and you're back with the Virtually Agile podcast. Welcome. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by someone with a beard that makes him look like a Nordic god, someone who helps scale ups remove their growing pains. Mr. Cliff Hazell is ex-Spotify and helped them scale from 700 to 5K people. All that on a flight levels expert. How goes it, Cliff? Feeling spooky today?
I feel very good. It's lovely to be here with you. I was contemplating dressing up, but I decided against it in the end. So yeah,
For our listeners who are wondering, we were recording on Halloween. I was wearing outfits earlier, but I got tired of wearing them, so I took them off. Anyway, the important thing is, as I said, we're here with Cliff, and he's got some great insights to share with us. Let's dive in. Firstly, tell us about you and your work for anyone who's unfamiliar with you, Cliff.
sure. So I started my career originally in product management, actually, mostly in telecoms. I'm originally from South Africa, which you may have gathered from my accent. I'm not actually Swedish. And after a hop, skip, and a jump through a couple of interesting things in that space, I found my way out here to Spotify in Sweden. I'm sure we will talk more about them later on. But basically, since then, since leaving the company, I've mostly been helping scale ups, going through, as you said, the growth challenges and basically building the scaffolding that helps company to run effectively as they're growing fast. I am not at all sort of a methodologist or attached to any specific method or tools or anything like this. I like to find pragmatic solutions, working with the people on the ground who have to deal with the consequences of the choices of what we do inside the organization. And yeah, mostly working with companies sort of in the sort of 30 to 300 size up until they're around 3K in size. And that's where I get most excited about helping and getting stuck in. Did that give you a little bit of a sense of what I'm up to?
Absolutely. You are like me in that we are what I call agnostic, right? We're agnostic to framework, to solution. My care is more about what works for the companies I'm working with, the teams that I'm working with, rather than dogmatically following a framework or rigid approach.
Yeah.
And I love the way you described it as a scaffolding. That's how I often describe it too. When you're making a building, you're building a house. When you're repairing a house, you're often putting a scaffolding up, and it's a temporary thing. It's something you put in place that enables you to learn. With that
Mm,
learning, you can pivot, you can adjust, you can adapt, and you can find what works for you.
very much so. Yeah. That resonates strongly. I think very often we get too attached to something we read in a book or something we heard that another company might or might not be doing. And then, yeah, you just get too far down the rabbit hole of trying to do what they did rather than doing what actually works. And I think a big part of it is actually taking the time to really understand the situation that you're working in. I'm surprised actually how often people can't really eloquently or clearly describe actually what it is that they're currently dealing. What is the issue you face? Why is it that you're considering borrowing these ideas from wherever you're borrowing them from? And often it's like, well, we're just looking for some magic and ponies, and maybe we can get some of them from Spotify or Google or OKRs or whatever it is. So yeah, it's an interesting challenge to overcome.
Very much so. And in fact, I was going to approach this topic with you later, but you've reminded me of it now, and I want to talk about it. So, the uncomfortable truths, the truths that Agilist needs to hear. You just kind of alluded to one of them, the over focus on framework approach, the copy and paste in the latest fad model. Tell
Yeah.
me more about some uncomfortable truths that you see and you believe people need to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote an article that kind of blew up a little bit on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. And I think there's a number of things that happen in that space. And I think one of the things that perhaps was the most surprising for a number of folks in that one was this idea that very often I see coaches and folks in the leadership role, you go off to some sort of workshop, training class, a conference, something, and come up with this shiny new idea. I learned that, Google is doing this or Spotify is doing this, or I went on a course about coaching stances. And so now everything is about that thing. And I understand it. I think it makes some sense. You've got a new shiny tool in your toolbox. You want to test it out. So I'm definitely supportive from this perspective. But I think the challenge is that very often what happens is that you end up over indexing on that idea and sort of, it's a bit like when you buy or you've ordered a new car, you start to see that car everywhere. It's a classic example of confirmation bias. And so you start using this tool in more places than actually would make sense. And so I often caution people to try to step back a little bit from this and not get so caught up in, this is the new shiny silver bullet. It's going to make all the things happen. So yeah.
Definitely resonates. See that a lot out there.
Yeah.
Do you know another one that bothers me? Another one that really gets to me is when people focus too much on agile. Like everything becomes agile this, agile that. They start every conversation with agile. You've got
Yeah.
agile marketing, agile HR. There's every framework under the sun named agile. And the thing is, people aren't ready to hear this. No one buys agile. No one asks for agile. Customers aren't buying agile. They're buying the outcomes. They're buying how your product makes them feel, how it saves them time and energy. So we don't need to start every conversation with agile. And that's not me saying that I don't believe in agile. I just
Yeah.
believe it doesn't need to be talked about in every conversation. And there's
Yeah.
more to the world than agile.
I think that there's a very strong correlation between how often companies talk about a thing, actually an inverse correlation. So if you're constantly talking about being agile, the likelihood that you're actually being agile is quite low. And I think it's the same thing when people are talking about customers or digital transformation or whatever it is. Uh, Companies who are customer centric don't talk about being customer centric. They are customer centric. And the same goes for agile companies, leading companies in other ways. You don't have to tell people because it's already obvious. And I'd like to kind of look at it like that and say, okay, cool. Well, you're talking a lot about agile. What is the thing you're actually trying to do? And how can we make it so that your customers and your employees hopefully can feel the impact of the changes that you're making? Because yeah, I don't care about process. I care about having good impact and making the world and your customers' lives a better place. And I think that's possible to find an intersection between those if we stop focusing so much on are you standing up for the right, for the right number of 15 minutes and do you ask the three questions in the right order? We can move on from this.
And I look forward to the day that we do. I was speaking with Mike Cohen when he joined me in the podcast, and he said, I'm looking forward to the day when we just stop talking about it because it's just the way we do it. We know it works and we don't need to talk about it all the time.
Yeah. I hope that day comes. And I get a lot of people asking me, it's because I don't describe what I do as about agile because for a long time it hasn't been. I sort of exist at the intersection. My background is, I've worked in the agile industry for a while. I've been an agile coach, but I've also worked in product management and I've done leadership things and a whole variety of different stuff. And that intersection, I think, is actually where the most interesting things are happening, helping people to change their behaviors so that they create better businesses, better customer outcomes, better environments for people to work in. That's what's cool. So
It is, and to be honest, and I have to keep quiet about this when I talk about it, but I'm not motivated by making my clients more money. Right?
mhm,
I don't wake up every day and think, do you know what I really want to do? I want to put some more money in that rich person's pocket. But what I do get excited about is helping people enjoy their work, helping them not dread a Monday, helping change the ways of working that helps them deliver better things, cooler stuff, and in ways that they don't hate, they don't dread. It isn't forced upon them.
yeah, that resonates strongly with me. I like that.
Good stuff. So let's dive into Spotify then. We've all heard of the Spotify model. I know our listeners have heard of it. They've probably experienced it once upon a time. They've probably even had someone try and force the Spotify model on them in some capacity. Give us the truth then. What was it like behind the scenes, Cliff?
So I have a talk that I've been doing for a little while called Beyond Copy Paste Agile, which is largely in response to this pattern of companies. Uh, People read an article or saw a video once and go, okay, well, that's how the company works. And then obviously copy it. You know how that story goes. And the point that I try to make in the talk is that the thing that's interesting about Spotify for me is it's not so much the outcome, the thing that you see, squads, chapters, tribes, and guilds. What's interesting is the company's ability to create its own way of working. And there's several things that I think a lot of people miss. And some of the other folks who work there have tried to talk about some of these ideas in different ways. One, it was a snapshot of a specific point in time. Uh, and by being a snapshot, it's 12 years ago that Henrik and Anders wrote the paper. It's nearly 10 years or so, since I think the video about Spotify's engineering culture came out. That's quite a long time ago. That's probably 2/3 of the company's life. Uh, when they were created, the company was around 700 people in size. It was just before, or about 500 people actually in size. It was just before I joined. The company's close to 9,000 now. So probably the same things don't work. But also there's this thing of the description is just about what was kind of able to be put on a page. If you think about it like a map of the London Underground is a simplification of the London Underground, right? It allows you to navigate and it explains some of the key concepts, but it's not an actual representation of the London Underground, because for it to be a real representation, it would have to be the actual London Underground with all its complexity and all its nuance. You can't describe a model with all the detail. You have to leave something out, right? Part of what gets left out is the variety between all the different areas. One tribe worked one way, another worked another way, another part is evolving in some direction. There's actually a very cool video on YouTube, and I'll link it to you a little bit later on. You can include it in notes if you want. One of the engineers, Nicholas Gustafson, and a guy by the name of Chelsea Hightower, who I think he was originally at Google, but I've been following him for years online. They're having a really cool conversation exploring some of these ideas, and that idea that every part of the company is just evolving at a different rate and trying to solve different problems. Things are very stable. Maybe you organize one way. Things are changing fast. You organize a different way. And I think there's a lot of this that kind of gets missed, and people go, okay, well, we're a big bank in the Netherlands, and so we should paint with the whole brush, the entire company the same way. And I mean, I've met some of the people from ING, and I think they've done some really interesting stuff. But the idea that they copied exactly what Spotify did, I'm not sure that that is possible or even necessarily true. They took some inspiration, and I think that that's fine. But at the same time, if you're not aware of the problem that you're solving, any solution will look like a good idea. And so, yeah, there's a lot of nuance to unpack. I still think that there's a ton of interesting things, and I have thousands of interesting stories about my time at the company. Yeah. Does that shine a little bit of a light on what you were wondering about?
Definitely shines a little bit of light, and I love the way you've described it as a snapshot. That's what it was, just like the Agile Manifesto, a snapshot in time, representative of what was happening at that point in time. It was never intended to be something to copy and paste. It couldn't possibly cover all of the nuance of what was going on there. It was just the easily digestible thing, sharing what we were doing at that point in time.
Yeah.
And what fascinates me is how it reached the levels of notoriety. I guess it's because, Spotify was one of those unicorn cool tech giants that grew very quickly and became a household name on everyone's phone and otherwise. And people just wanted to be part of that success. And they said, when you see someone succeeding, you think that's the model I've got to try. That's the blueprint. And it's just fascinating that it went from being this, hey, look at what we did, this cool thing we did. And suddenly it's become one of the frameworks out there that people aspire towards. It's put alongside, Scrum at Scale, SAFe. We're doing the Spotify model. And it was never intended to be that way.
I think there's something quite interesting in the way you highlight it, because it gets contrasted with these other models that are trying to be sort of methods for scaling Agile. And I was actually talking with someone a few minutes ago, and this topic came up. And the thing is that there's actually very little inside the papers and the stories that are being told about Spotify that are trying to address real scaling problems. The vast majority of them talk about team level design and shapes and constructions. And my sort of, what I find interesting is that there was a lot of attempts to try to address some of these scaling things, but they weren't codified in that paper in 2012. And so when people talk about it as that model is trying to address a scaling problem, I'm like, I don't think it was. Not in the same way that people mean. If you're Bosch and you've got 400,000 people working at your company, I don't think that the Spotify model is even talking to the types of problems that you have. When I left Spotify, there was the area of the organization that I was working in was about 700 people. That was bigger than the entire company was when I joined. And that was just the area that we were working in. You're now interacting with 5 or 6 other areas that are of similar size, some that have enormous influence over the things that you're building. And for me, the problem of trying to build something at scale is not one of trying to, do something like TI planning necessarily and iron out all of your dependencies in advance. It's to try to create these communication frameworks and conversations, at least, that create this point where we can have an interaction that says, I need this thing, you need that thing. We need to somehow iron out what order we're going to do these things in. And not just on I need you to, fill this in this piece of paper or create this entry in the database, but actually our products and solutions need to co-evolve together to build something that is better for our customer. That's how you build things like a cohesive product and a platform of services. It's not just do a PI planning and talk about your dependencies. And so I think the challenge is that, unfortunately, in our industry, one of the most talked about frameworks in contrast is something like SAFe, which is probably one of the few in my mind that is actually trying to answer all of the questions that people are asking about scaling. And we'll probably disagree on whether or not some of the answers are good or bad. I think anyone you talk to will have a strong opinion, both about Spotify, about Scrum at Scale, and about SAFe and so on. But it really is one of the few that I think is actually trying to address the questions that people have. How do we deal with such large, vast, complex organizations? And simple things like, well, make everything a squad or a chapter. I don't know. Uh, not saying it's a bad idea, but I don't think it's fixing that problem.
I think some of it is in the language, as you say. You've got language like squads, chapters, tribes, guilds, and that all suggests some level of scale, right? So for something that was originally dealing with team levels, you've got this language, this vernacular, this lexicon which suggests scale. And people naturally thought, oh, well, we could apply this to what we're doing. This might be the answer to our problem, even though it wasn't supposed to be the answer to a problem.
Yeah.
I think it's natural for us to seek those answers. And I think it's entirely natural to experiment, take something, experiment with it, learn what works. You mentioned safe. I'm certainly not an apologist or an advocate for safe. I think it can fit in certain circumstances. I'm not going to sit there and bash it like many people do. I do think it's answering, as you said, many of the questions that people naturally have about how they do things at scale, how they ultimately manage that bi-directional flow of information of here's our vision, our strategy, what we're focusing on and why, down to those building the stuff and how can we get out of your way and enable you to succeed in that environment. So yeah, it's not an easy task. It's not an easy job. That's all I'll say.
I think when I think about this problem, like what I see is that there's really kind of two parts to this. It's the piece of the pain of getting things actually delivered and out the door. And the reality is that a lot of organizations are facing these challenges. And there's a myriad of reasons why that is. There's too much work in the system. We've structured it so that every team that needs to do something needs something from another team, perhaps in another area of the business, or maybe even another department, maybe even another country. And so we're trying to manage all of this complexity to get anything done. So that's kind of the first part, getting anything done. The second part of the question is getting the right stuff done. What are the things we should do? And often what I see happening is in the organization, you'll introduce something like product management and there'll be a lot of conversation about what should be done. But for me, unless that actually gets to a point where as a collective, a group of teams, we know that this thing here is number one for all of us, right? Whether that means I'm helping you working on number one, or I'm staying out of your way while you work on number one, any variant of this is fine. But there is a clear number one, and we know which one gets the fast track through the organization. Unless you have this, which I actually put on the other side of solving the focus problem, we know which answer already. And some organizations have a very clear understanding. But most of the time, we're actually dealing with, we just need to get anything done. And that is about sequencing our work first. And once we do that, we can start to explore this topic of what actually would give us higher leverage. What are the things that are more meaningful for our customers, for our business, for our employees, for the society that we live in? So I like to tackle it in this order with, of course, the nuance. If you're already quite focused, maybe start with leverage and figure it out. But there's no point in prioritizing. Most organizations actually have this, and you've probably seen it. Multiple lists. Every team has their own list. Every department has their own list. But for me, as the individual person working in a team, I've actually got 6 different input backlogs to decide. And I end up having to decide what is important. The problem is 2 things. 1, I don't have the same information that you do that tells me which of those things were important. I have a different set of information, not necessarily wrong, but a different set. The second thing is that because multiple of us are making those decisions, we're unlikely to make the same decision. And that's actually the more important piece of it. I don't care if you can make a good decision. If the other person is making a totally different decision, you're going to be pulling in opposite directions. So we need to address that piece first, in my mind. And then we can start to talk about which one would be the best one to do first.
I mean, then we're basically not only are we pulling in opposite directions, we're potentially getting each other's way. We're slowing down delivery of value to begin with. I think so many companies get caught up in focusing on efficiency, churning out new stuff, more stuff, faster, quicker, better, and less about actually, are we building the right thing?
Yeah.
Because to be honest, it doesn't matter how many of these new features you chuck out there. If none of them add any value to your customers, they're a complete waste of time. Every single one of them are being a complete waste of time.
I think that I would take it even a step further than just about the waste of time. I think there's also this consequence where we have very often unintended consequences from the things that we've built. We pushed really hard to get this delivery out there, but we burnt out 17 people on that journey. And that for me is a non-acceptable situation, right? A lot of companies will say, oh, well, we just roll with it. So we'll get the new people in, we'll figure it out or whatever. One of the posts that I wrote recently the title was basically, you're constantly trying, your company has dead canaries in its coal mine. And instead of trying to figure out where the toxic fumes are coming from, you're trying to do something that improves the health or the resilience of your canaries. So instead of trying to fix people after they've burned out, figure out why they're burning out in the first place. And the same is true for so many different things. We go into the situation where we try to fix the problem or fix the symptom after the fact, rather than actually trying to prevent it. And I think part of the challenge is that we've created a situation where there isn't any glory in prevention. And so people are getting far more recognition or reward for putting out a fire that in many cases they've actually intentionally or even unintentionally started. And we need to start to address that, which is perhaps something that should have been the elephant in the room on my 10 unfortunate truths or uncomfortable truths.
Yeah, I mean, we celebrate the firefighters, the people that go the extra mile and do unsustainable hours or fix something out of hours or whatever it may be, and we don't celebrate the people that avoided that problem being there to begin with.
Yeah.
The scenario you were describing about the canaries sounds a lot like when there's a systemic challenge around, burnout, stress, mental health. And the answer seems to be from a lot of companies, well, let's make sure you've got access to mental health programs and an app on your phone, and that's going to fix the problem, rather than actually, how can we reduce the amount of stress we're putting upon you? And it's just
Yeah.
fascinating that that's the approach.
Yeah. I think you need both sides of it. You need some way to actually deal with it because, I mean, unfortunately, until the problem is solved, you will have people burning out. So addressing that is important, but I think also looking into the deeper root causes of why is this happening? What is it in our culture that is creating this environment where people are working themselves so close to the bone?
Good insights. Let's pivot a little bit. Flight levels. For those of our listeners that aren't familiar with the concept of flight levels, Cliff, you're the guy. What's it about?
Yeah, so it's about a couple of things. I think mostly what I noticed in a lot of the organizations I was working with, and I found this at Spotify as well, right, is that everyone is very focused on trying to improve the team, right? And the metaphor that I like to use to explain the problem with this is one of a keyboard. If you imagine your company as a keyboard and your customers come to you and said, hey, what we'd like you to do is write us a letter, in this case, a nice love letter. What we've done is we've basically organized our teams as if each team has a single row on the keyboard. And the problem with this is that in order to write any letter, we actually need to get multiple teams to do multiple things across many different areas of that keyboard. As we grow and specialize, we specialize the teams even further. We actually give them even just one key on the keyboard, one team, that owns each part of the product or service. And most of what we're doing as leaders is we're trying to get the team that pushes the A key to push that button as fast as possible. And the problem for me is that lots of A keys doesn't make for a good letter. And as you said earlier, we're trying to deliver some kind of value to our customers, or to the business in some form. If the customer wants a love letter, we should optimize for love letters coming out. And the way we do that is not by getting the A team to push the A key as fast as possible, right? What we need to do is flip that conversation around and say, how do we actually get this letter to move through the keyboard? And what we need is the right team pushing the right key at the right time. It becomes about the interactions and the coordination loops between the teams more than it is about the performance of any one single team. The same is true when you consider it about individuals. And I think this is part of the challenge, is that we're actually trying to create this environment where we assume that the typing and the software creation part of our work, I'm assuming most of the people listening are working in a software environment, but regardless of what you're doing, the actual typing bit of the work is such a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. It's all of this overhead of meeting, syncing, coordinating, and so on. And if we can just be clear on which letter are we trying to write, let's put one letter in the fast lane. Everybody pushes the right key for that letter, get it out the door, then we can move on to the next one. It's a totally different way of looking at the organization, and it's not about trying to optimize for team performance. So after seeing this many, many times, what we started to realize was that the solution to addressing these kind of challenges is actually not inside the team. It's not to say that there's no opportunity for improving in the context of a team, but if we need 15 teams to do something, The only time it would make sense to improve any one of the team is if that team is dragging down the performance of the entire set of 15 teams. And that's almost never the case in my experience. It's the interaction, the waiting times, and the handoffs. So what we do is we think about the organization as through the lens of three levels. At the bottom, we have the doing stuff, right? Operational level. Teams making something. It could be hiring people, marketing campaigns, software, financial reporting, anything like this. At the top, we have the strategy. Where is the organization trying to get to, and what is our rough outline of our plan? Are we going to the top of the mountain, or are we building a tunnel through it? That kind of thing can be clear. And in the middle, we're doing this kind of coordination activity where we're saying this group of teams works together to produce this letter. And so what we've got is this regular set of conversations that we can have to say, okay, we'll plan this bit together. We'll start these things together. We'll finish those bits together. We'll remind each other about these steps here and there. For me, the key is it's not just about connecting across the organization, as in from left to right between the teams. It's also about up and down. So we can see these different levels connecting. How does the strategy translate into this OKR, into what I'm doing in my team? And as an individual sitting inside the team, for the first time, many of the organizations I'm working with, they can say, hey, I actually understand why what I do is important. And I can also see how the company's strategic decisions affect and shapes where I should and shouldn't be looking for things to work on. And that's quite a profound shift. So that's flight levels in a nutshell. There's plenty more to say. I've got several workshops and, thousands of hours of talking about it. But yeah, and at a high level, that's roughly the concept.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Whenever I've thought about flight levels and similarly to the way you've described, it always seems very similar to me to various elements of scaled agile.
Mhm.
So you've got the teams on the ground, you've then got the release trains, which are more like a program level, and you have various synchronizations and governance in place to enable that flow. And then you've got the strategic portfolio level. Do you believe that's a fair comparison or a natural comparison that others have made? And if not, where do you believe it differs?
I don't think that this idea is necessarily totally unique. I've seen several models that have this kind of conceptual thinking built into it. And the idea that there is sort of a different level of abstraction for each level of detail in the organization, I don't think is new or unique to any of these tools or models. Where I think it differs is that what I like to do is firstly start with where the organization actually is and really build a deep understanding of what are the problems and the circumstances that we're currently facing. So not just what are we bad at, but also what are we good at? Because I think very often what I see, and it's not only to SAFe, it's any transformation I've seen, is they come in and essentially throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you've heard that metaphor. All of this stuff has to go. We've got to get rid of all the middle management, or we've got to get rid of all the testing teams, or we've got to get rid of all the agile coaches or whatever. And it's like, I mean, okay, there might be a scenario in the future where you have less of those things or those roles because you've changed the way things are working. But I don't think that a wholesale just, boot everything and just rip out the guts of the organization is a sensible way to approach that. So what I like to do is find one thing that we think would have high leverage in the organization. Is that focusing on a specific piece of the organization, a value stream, maybe a specific product line, a certain interaction point, and take one step at a time towards doing that? I don't know about you, but I've never seen a SAFe transformation or an agile transformation or anything that has the word transformation in it that goes one step at a time. It tends to be much more big bang. And I find this somewhat ironic because if the idea is that we want to try to get to a space where we're more agile, surely the way to become more agile, the path there should also be an agile path, not a giant big design upfront, make all the decisions today when we know the least approach. And yet that's what we're doing. And so it's not that I think that we can't get to something. Like I can totally see where something sort of like the ideas inside SAFe can work, but the path to get there almost never looks like the image is drawn. And these large scale, big and install kind of approaches, I've never seen one work, and I don't think I ever will. I just don't believe that it's possible to change something that large with as many parts without breaking large chunks of what actually works already quite well.
It fascinates me that Scaled Agile chose the train as their vehicle for an agile way of working, given that a train goes on tracks and can't pivot or deviate based on new input, right? So it's very much you go in that direction, forwards or backwards. That's all you've got. Just amuses me, Cliff.
Yeah.
It's maybe the marketing team. I mean, Safe are a fantastic marketing engine. That's one of the things I think they may have missed out on. And like
They're a
you, I often
fantastic money printing engine as well. I don't know if you know that they're owned by a private equity firm. They were recently sold, and so all the money is going to your aforementioned very wealthy individuals. Um, yeah.
I was going to say that if I believe if any framework or approach was truly agile, at some point on their implementation plan, with all the nodes saying this is going to happen here and this is your roadmap, if they were truly agile, they'd have a node in there, some sort of reflection point that says, hey, is this even for you? Should you be trying something else? They
Mhm.
never do. It's always let's push forward with our approach, our model. You can just, you'll learn and we'll keep going.
I think that's something that's quite different about the way that I work as well. And I don't say that this is necessarily something that's built into flight levels. I know a number of other folks who use, these kind of metaphors and ideas are doing the same. But I quite regularly say to folks, hey, I'm not sure that I can help you with that problem. Or maybe you need to solve the other thing first before you get there. And there's a lot of different situations where I think I can be enormously helpful, but I don't want to just jump in on something simply because, you need somebody to do a thing by next week, Tuesday. Yeah, I don't think you need that thing. So I'm going to maybe say, hang on, let's let you talk to somebody else or figure out a different path forward first. And maybe we chat later on. And sometimes that's been the case that we've chatted later on and other times not. But yeah, I think it's tricky when you have a big toolbox, as a lot of people seem to think that they do with not just with Safe, but also I think agile coaching in general. People tend to think that their toolbox is much bigger than it actually is. I've got something for every single scenario, and to go in and you think that like, I mean, this was again in my 10 uncomfortable truths. The CEO hasn't hired you to help the entire company. They've asked you to fix that particular thing or to work on this particular part. And the idea, I'm fascinated by how often, and I've been just as guilty of this myself, but I still see people doing this all the time, thinking that someone who's never been the CEO of a company can tell the CEO how to run their organization and that that person should take them seriously. Like, I just, I don't know. You graduated 14 minutes ago. What the hell do you know about running a company? Like, sorry, dude. Um, but on the other hand, I guess people do this with McKinsey all the time and they, pay an absolute fortune for their insights. So yeah.
Definitely an uncomfortable truth. I just wanted to drag us back slightly to what you were saying there around, identifying one thing in the system and then like doubling down on that. It's something I often do. I'm a big believer in a technique I call the 8 wastes of software engineering by Mary and Tom Poppendick. I turn
Mhm.
that into a retrospective, and it's often a retrospective I do at scale with companies. And you basically identify, right, of these 8 wastes, i.e., handoffs, extra features, delays, defects, et cetera, which of these are the hitting us most at scale, and what can we do to address that? And then equivalently, you could flip it around and say, which of these is not a problem for us? How can we amplify that? How can we, tell that tale? How can we do more of that?
Yeah.
So that to me is a great way of, thinking or, thinking locally, acting systemically. And another quote I often refer to around kind of bringing about change at scale is that think big, start small, learn fast. So you've got these grand aspirations, great. Let's try something small on a small scale first, pilot it, experiment, find out what works, and then amplify the good things, dampen the bad things.
Yeah. I think it's fascinating what you were saying about how often we go in trying to find the wastes. And I think it makes some sense. I get where that comes from. I've often had a lot more success with finding the bright spots and amplifying those as a starting strategy. The rationale is quite simple. If you remove all the bad things, it doesn't necessarily mean that they get replaced by good things. Often they get replaced by worse things or equally bad things and unproductive stuff. And so if you rather try to crowd out the waste with good stuff by focusing on the good points, I think you can often have a better approach. And this is specifically true when we're talking about sort of the like change part of the work that we do. I don't think that introducing something new is usually going to be the solution. If you can find rather one team where this stuff actually works really well, get them to tell their story about how they work. Now you've got a proven case inside your company. Nobody can say, hey, this doesn't work here. We're doing it right here. There you go.
Absolutely.
Try to spread this and
Yeah.
amplify it. Much better strategy, I think.
I've got this technique called the impediment tentacles, right? It's got like a picture of an octopus and it's got like 10 lenses you look through around an impediment. And one of them, I think it's number 10, is shielded. So which teams from in this company are shielded? This is not a problem for them. And why? And then you drill down to that. And how can we tell that story? How can we amplify the fact that they're shielded from it? What is it about them that means this isn't a problem? And how can we do more of that elsewhere? So it just reminded me of that when you were saying it.
Yeah.
Conscious of time, Cliff, we've got to wrap things up. Where can our listeners learn more about you and your work?
Sure. The best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on that side. I'm posting pretty much every weekday about the topics that we've just discussed. I am also writing on my website at cliffhazell.com. If you jump on there, you can find and subscribe to my newsletter. A lot of similar posts exploring things in a little bit longer form. And I'll be building out a couple of other things over the coming weeks and months. So yeah, if you'd like to connect, I'm very, very happy for people to message me and chat to me about situations. I don't need people to pay me in order for us to have a meaningful conversation. Very happy if you want to just jump on and have a quick chat. I'm more than welcome, or you're more than welcome. And I'm very happy to share and bounce things and I can be helpful.
You heard it here, folks. Reach out to Cliff, that deliciously bearded guy, if you want to have a chat about anything or anything. Our time is up, and you know how to get more of this podcast, you knowledge-hungry creatures you. Hit that follow or subscribe button to get each new episode as they land. And do me a favor, if you found value in listening today, why not share this episode with someone else? Thank you for joining us, Cliff. Don't stop believing, folks. Till next time.